Welcome to Out from the Horrorbox. I'm your dreaming host, Dom, and in this series, we'll be taking a look at the first two films in the Nightmare on Elm Street series. In 1984, New Line and Wes Craven came together to give the world a new kind of slasher in A Nightmare on Elm Street. We were introduced to the quippy Freddy Krueger and changed the game in the slasher genre. After the success of the first film, in 1985, New Line barreled ahead without Craven and birthed a Nightmare on Elm Street 2, Freddy's Revenge. Not well received back when originally released, but with time, the film has garnered a cult following as well as a queer interpretation. I don't know about you, but I'm craving to get into a Nightmare on Elm Street series. Let's start with how this all started. Back in 1976, a 27-year-old Robert Shea started a little film distribution company called New Line Cinema that supplied foreign and art films to campuses, such as bringing the 1936 propaganda film Reefer Madness to American colleges to the company's early success. New Line also released some classic foreign language films such as Stay As You Are, Immoral Tales, and Get Out Your Handkerchiefs, which earned New Line its first Academy Award nomination and win for Best Foreign Film. That's what the category was called at the time, until recently it was changed to International Film. In 1976, New Line secured funding to produce its first feature-length film, Stunts, which was released in 1977. The film was not a critical nor domestic commercial success and caused New Line to hold off funding another full-length film in the future. Besides producing and co-producing a couple films, including the film Polyester from director John Waters, New Line distributed George A. Romero's Night of the Living Dead, as well as gaining the rights to distribute the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which was a great financial success for them. And thus the company had an understanding of horror's appeal to its core youth audience, as well as an idea of what could be done with just a couple $1 million for production. So Robert Shea was on the lookout for a film his company could produce, wanting more control over his product than just the distribution. I want to run quickly over the director. We last examined his films with the Scream franchise, which we'll get a redo episode. But I didn't really get into him at the time, so without further ado. Wesley Earl Craven, better known as Wes Craven, was born on August 2nd, 1939, in Cleveland. He was raised Baptist and went on to get his master's degree in philosophy and writing from Johns Hopkins University, which I didn't know that. That's kind of crazy. I didn't know he was all mastered out in, philosophy. Craven taught English at Westminster College from 1964 to 65. Was a humanities professor at Clarkson University. At the time, it was Clarkson College of Technology, and also taught at Madrid-Waddington High School. Craven would leave the academic field to pursue a career in the film industry. Now, also, wouldn't that have been awesome to have been in one of his classes before he made it big? Starting off with the lucrative pornography industry, Craven made many X-rated films under pseudonyms, with an undisclosed role in the production of the infamous Deep Throat. Craven went on to direct his first feature film as director, Last House on the Left, which was released in 1972. A frequent collaborator of Craven's was Sean S. Cunningham, who served as producer for Last House on the Left, with $90,000 in backing funds. We took a look at Cunningham's later films that jump-started its own franchise, Friday the 13th. Craven expected the film to be shown at only a few theaters, which, according to him, quote, gave me the freedom to be outrageous. But the movie was screened more widely than he assumed, and leaving the first-time director ostracized due to the content of the film. After the negative experience of Last House on the Left, Craven tried to move out of the horror genre by writing non-horror films with his partner Sean S. Cunningham, none of which attracted any financial backing. Finally, based on an advance from a friend about the ease of filming in the Nevada deserts, Craven began to write a new horror film based on that locale. The resulting film, The Hills Have Eyes, cemented Craven as a horror film director, with Craven noting, "It soon became clear that I wasn't going to do anything else unless it was scary." In 1982, after finishing production on the film Swamp Thing, Craven started writing the screenplay for A Nightmare on Elm Street. Craven was inspired by several newspaper articles printed in the Los Angeles Times in the 1970s about Hmong refugees. They fled to the United States because of the war and genocide in Laos, Cambodia, and in Vietnam. They suffered disturbing nightmares and refused to sleep. Some of the men died in their sleep soon after. The condition afflicted the men between the ages of 19 and 57 and was believed to be sudden unexplained death syndrome, or Brugada syndrome, or both. Craven said, "It was a series of articles in the LA Times, 3 small articles about men from Southeast Asia who were from immigrant families and had died in the middle of nightmares. And the paper never correlated them, never said, 'Hey, we've had another story like this.'" The 1970s pop song Dreamweaver by Gary Wright sealed the story for Craven, giving him not only an artistic setting to jump off from, but a synthesizer riff for the movie soundtrack. Craven also stated that he drew some inspiration for the film from Eastern religions. Other sources attribute the inspiration for the film to be a 1968 student film project made by Craven's students at Clarkson University. The student film parodied contemporary horror films and was filmed along Elm Street in Potsdam, New York. The film's villain, Freddy Krueger, is drawn from Craven's early life. One night, a young Craven saw an elderly man walking on the side path outside the window of his home. The man stopped to glance at a startled Craven and walked off. This served as the inspiration for Krueger. Initially, Fred Krueger was intended to be a child molester, but Craven eventually characterized him as a child murderer to avoid being accused of exploiting a spate of highly publicized child molestation cases that occurred in California around the time of the film's production. On Freddy's nature, Craven states that, in a sense, Freddy stands for the worst of parenthood and adulthood, the dirty old man, the nasty father, and the adult who wants children to die rather than help them prosper. He's the boogeyman and the worst fear of children, the adult that's out there to get them. He's a very primal figure, sort of like Kronos devouring his children. That evil, twisted, perverted father figure that wants to destroy and is able to get them at their most vulnerable moment, which is when they're asleep. By Craven's account, his own adolescent experiences led him to the name Freddy Krueger. He had been bullied at school by a child named Fred Krueger. Craven had done the same thing in his film The Last House on the Left, where the villain's name was shortened to Krug. Craven chose to make Krueger's sweater red and green after reading an article in 1982 Scientific America that said those two colors were the most clashing colors in the human retina. Craven strove to make Krueger different from other horror film villains of the era and recalled in 2014, "A lot of the killers were wearing masks: Leatherface, Michael Myers, Jason. I wanted my villain to have a mask, but be able to talk and taunt and threaten. So I thought of him being burned and scarred." He also said that the killer should use something other than a knife because it was too common. So I thought, how about a glove with steak knives? I gave the idea over to our special effects guy, Jim Doyle. Ultimately, 2 models of the glove were built. The hero glove that was only used when anything needed to be cut, and the stunt glove that was less likely to cause injury. For a time, Craven had considered a sickle as the weapon of choice for the killer, but around the 3rd or 4th draft of the script, the iconic glove had become his final choice. In 1982, Robert Shaye got a hold of the script to Nightmare on Elm Street. Shaye really liked the script and paid $14,000 for it. New Line produced the movie, spending less than $2 million to make it. A Nightmare on Elm Street was produced and released by New Line Cinema in 1984. The resulting franchise was New Line's first commercially successful series, leading the company to be nicknamed The House That Freddy Built.
The kids of Elm Street don't know it yet, but something is coming to get them.
There's something out there, isn't there?
We just see cuts happen.
What did that, Lieutenant?
I don't know.
Tina!
What's the coroner got to say?
He's in the jar and puking since he saw it.
They're gonna kill me for sure.
Did you do it?
There was somebody else there.
He was locked in a room with a girl who went in alive and came out in a rubber bag.
No one knows where it came from or who it will visit next.
Nancy? There's something wrong with you. You're imagining things.
Nightmare on Elm Street.
Do you believe in the boogeyman?
No.
Whatever you do, don't fall asleep.
No!
She's the only one who can stop it. If she fails,
I'm your boyfriend now, Nancy.
no one will survive. From Wes Craven, director of The Hills Have Eyes and Last House on the Left, a new masterpiece in fantasy terror, Nightmare on Elm Street.
Tina Gray, played by Amanda Wyss, awakens from a horrific nightmare involving a disfigured man chasing her in a boiler room. The man is wearing a glove with knives attached. As she sits up in bed, her mother comes into her room and points out 4 mysterious slashes on her nightgown. The following morning, Tina's best friend, Nancy Thompson, and Nancy's boyfriend, Glenn Lance, console her, revealing that they each also had a nightmare the previous night. Nancy and Glenn are played by Heather Langenkamp and Johnny Depp, respectively. The couple stay over at Tina's house when Tina's mother goes out of town, where Nancy also confesses to having a nightmare about the disfigured man. Tina's boyfriend, Rod Lane, played by Nick Corey, interrupts their sleepover. That night, when Tina falls asleep, she dreams of the disfigured man chasing her from her house, back to the boiler room. Rod is awakened by Tina's thrashing and sees her being dragged out of bed. She is fatally slashed in the abdomen by an unseen force, forcing him to flee as Nancy and Glenn awaken to find Tina bloodied and dead. The next day, Nancy's father, policeman Don Thompson, played by John Saxon, arrests Rod despite his pleas of innocence. At school, Nancy falls asleep in class and dreams that Tina's corpse is guiding her down to the school's basement. The disfigured man chases her to the boiler room where she is cornered. She then deliberately burns her arm on a pipe. The burn startles her awakened class, and she notices a burn mark on her arm. Nancy visits Rod at the police station, where he describes Tina's death along with his own recent nightmares about the same man stalking her in her dreams, leading Nancy to believe that the disfigured man killed Tina. At home, Nancy falls asleep in the bathtub and is nearly drowned by the man. Nancy then relies on caffeine to stay awake and invites Glenn to watch over her as she dreams. In her dream, Nancy sees the man preparing to kill Rod in his cell, but he turns his attention towards her. Nancy runs away and wakes up when her alarm clock goes off. The man kills Rod by wrapping a bedsheet around his neck, staging it as a suicide by hanging. At Rod's funeral, Nancy's parents become worried when she describes her dreams. Her mother, Marge, played by Renee Blakely, takes her to a sleep disorder clinic where, in a dream, Nancy grabs the man's fedora with the name Fred Krueger written in it and pulls it into the real world. After barricading the house, Marge explains that Fred Krueger, who was played by Robert Englund, was a child murderer who killed 20 children but was released on a technicality. The victims' parents, who lived on their street, burned Krueger alive, seeking vigilante justice. Nancy realizes that Krueger, now a vengeful ghost, is killing her and her friends out of revenge and to satiate his psychopathic needs. Nancy tries to call Glenn to warn them, but his father prevents her from speaking to him. Glenn falls asleep and is killed by Krueger. Now alone, Nancy puts Marge to sleep and asks Don, who is across the street investigating Glenn's death, to break into the house in 20 minutes. Nancy rigs booby traps around the house and grabs Krueger out of the dream and into the real world. The booby traps affect Krueger enough that Nancy can light him on fire and lock him in the basement. Nancy rushes to the door for help. The police arrive to find that Krueger has escaped from the basement. Nancy and Don go upstairs to find a burning Krueger smothering Marge in her bedroom. After Don extinguishes the fire, Krueger and Marge vanish into the bed. When Don leaves the room, Krueger rises from the bed behind Nancy. Realizing that Krueger is fueled by his victim's fear, she calmly turns her back to him. Krueger evaporates when he attempts to lunge at her. Nancy steps outside into a bright and foggy morning where all her friends and her mother are still alive. Nancy gets into Glenn's convertible to go to school when the green and red striped top suddenly comes down and locks them inside. The car drives uncontrollably down the street. 3 girls in white dresses playing jump rope can be heard chanting Krueger's nursery rhyme as Marge is grabbed by Krueger through the front door window. We move on to some trivia about the film A Nightmare on Elm Street and learn some things about the behind the scenes, the production, and the actors. According to Wes Craven, Robert Englund was not the first choice for the role of Freddy Krueger. Craven had initially wanted a stuntman to play the part, but upon testing several stuntmen, he realized he needed a real actor. Other ideas were to cast an elderly actor, but he feared that they would be too soft for the way that he would have wanted the character to act. Englund eventually got the part by showing up at his audition with ash smeared under his eyes to sink them in, greasing his hair back with a dipstick from under the hood of his car, and blinking as little as possible. And I'm so glad that he got this role, because you can't imagine anyone else other than Robert Englund in the role of Freddy Krueger. I think Jackie Earle Haley, and we'll get to the remake later down the line, but I think he does a pretty okay job. I think he captures the essence pretty okay, but I think if you're gonna replace him, you need someone who has honestly, if they kind of did like how they do the Doctor, where they kind of give them their own distinct style. Like if they were like, okay, we're gonna bring back Freddy Krueger, but he's going to be played by someone else, and you can kind of give that whole reason he looks different is because, it's like it's somebody else's dream, he looks a little different, and it makes a little bit of sense. You could then be like, okay, you play him to your own different kind of style. Like, I would love that too. Like, maybe his style is a little bit different, but reminiscent of Englund. I think there's certain ways you could do it. I think trying to do a 1-for-1 is a little, I don't know if that'll work exactly, unless you're the way I would do it is then you could keep him in shadow so you don't really see his face as much, and from there you could kind of play up his antics. But I think if you were gonna like bring him back, I would tone him down a little bit because he got very wacky and punny towards the end. You could try something a little bit more darker, back to like how he was in this one. I mean, he's still like a little more like out there and like zany at certain points, but it's not as much as like he gets to be. The idea behind the glove was a practical one on Wes Craven's part, as he wanted to give the character a unique weapon, but also something that could be made cheaply and wouldn't be difficult to use or transport. At the time, he was studying primal fears embedded in the subconscious of people in all cultures, and discovered that one of those fears is attacked by animal claws. Around the same time, he saw his cat unsheath its claws, and the two concepts kind of merged. And although the original script, the blades were fishing knives, not steak knives, as in the finished film. And honestly, yeah, like, I mean, it creates a distinct, weapon, a distinct style for that. Like, Leatherface he's synonymous with a chainsaw, right? Michael Myers is synonymous with a butcher knife. Jason is synonymous with a machete. Ghostface has his knife. Chucky has another knife, but it's more of like a voodoo knife that most people know of. And with Freddy, like, you give him those like clawed fingers, and he just stands out above everyone else. Like, his weapon is like more like maneuverable than the others. And it's distinct. It gives him a distinct shape. Like, that's what you want. An easy identifiable profile. So you see him and you know, oh yeah, that's Freddy right there. The scene where Freddy presses through the wall above Nancy was shot by stretching a sheet of spandex across a hole in the wall and pressing against it. In the shot, Freddy is played by special effects designer Jim Doyle. And honestly, it's one of those shots where it does look like it's like, how did they do that? Like before CGI, like, wow, how did they really, like, how did you get that to for the wall to like press in like that? And like, it's like when you hear it and you understand how they did it, in retrospect, it's like, wow, why didn't I think of that? But like, and it goes to show like why I think when you're doing it with CGI, it just doesn't, it comes off looking weird and even kind of like plasticky. But I think it just works so well the way that they originally did it, and I don't understand why you would try to even attempt it with because again, as we'll get to the remake, and we'll see certain things that they tried to redo and replicate in that one, and this one just does it so much better without the advantage of having any type of CGI. This is before all that CGI and anything like that. So the way that they, like, there's just things that they did that, like, it's like, wow, I mean, that's one way to do it. That's a really cool way to do it. There's a scene where Nancy attempts to warn Glenn that Freddy is coming after him. She looks down to discover Freddy's mouth and tongue have taken from the form on the bottom half of the phone. The effect is made with cheap rubber and prosthetic. The effects team also reportedly stated that Heather Langenkamp wanted to take the prop home after shooting, which they thought was a little unusual. I don't know why they would think that's unusual. Honestly, to me, anyone who would want to take that home is, that's a cool person in my book. Somebody that knows, like, what the gag is, what they're getting into, especially that, like, that prosthetic of it's his tongue coming out of the phone, and like, I mean, that's awesome. That's such a cool, like, effect, and that's such a cool, like, what do you call it, prop, And honestly, it is a cool prop. It's a cool fact. It's a cool thing. Like that's like part of like, and that's been copied many times later in horror, and it's just something that I think they play around with a lot in other things like to copy it. And I just think that anyone who would want to take that home, that's a pretty groovy person. In the opening dream, Tina sees and hears lambs. This is the play on the phrase like a lamb to slaughter, a phrase originating in the Bible. It means an innocent and helpless creature that is unknowingly in danger, and adept description of Tina and her friends, obviously, going to like a sheep to slaughter when they have to go to sleep. That's when this entity, formerly this man, Freddy Krueger now, I mean, that's what we know him as, and he invades their dreams and he kills them. And I always wondered that too, like, why is there just a lamb in the beginning of this film and we hear like lambs and stuff? I think the way I kind of rationalized that though in my own head, besides this, was that it's kind of that whole thing of like you're counting sheep to get to sleep. And I know that, I mean, lambs and sheep aren't the same thing, but I kind of feel like it was something kind of like that. Or it was just kind of meant to be something kind of weird because it's a dream. So you just see this lamb and it's just like something weird in your dream. And it's just, you know, like sometimes something weird will just appear in there and you never know why. And that's one thing too I always thought about, like in their dreams. How come nothing weird, like more weird stuff doesn't happen in their dreams? But I guess maybe Freddy has some kind of control too over what's happening in the dream. So that could explain why, like, oh, you're not just like they're naked or you're waiting for a test, or like it has something to do with like where you are. So he kind of lulls you into this kind of safety and then pulls the rug out from underneath you. That's my guess. It could be something different. I mean, I think that's what you're supposed to take from that, right? Like when he leads them to like the boiler room, right? I think that's where you're supposed to. So he has some kind of control over the dream. I don't know. In the original script, the movie ends happily. Nancy kills Krueger by ceasing to believe in him, then awakens to discover that everything that happened in the movie was an elongated nightmare. She then says goodbye to her mother and drives to school with her friends. However, Robert Shaye wanted a twist ending that would leave the way open for sequels. Of course, every producer, that's the note that they always leave you with. He suggested that fooling the audiences to thinking Krueger had been defeated, only to reveal that in the final scene itself is actually a nightmare. And then the end of the film with Freddy driving the car away from the house and the kids screaming. Wes Craven hated this ending, and ultimately 4 endings were filmed. Craven's happy ending, Shaye's Freddy ending, and 2 versions of a compromise ending Craven and Shaye had reached, in which Nancy's mother is pulled back into the house, but the audience is left slightly ambiguous as to what's going on. Craven has always maintained that the film should have had the happy ending he originally wrote. And honestly, guys, for as much as I like the dreamy, logical, kind of the weird, hypnagogic kind of stuff, I kind of agree with Craven. Maybe it should have ended, because then it gives you this kind of weirdness when you get to the third one when Nancy returns, because it's like, so then what happened? Like, did they get out of the dream that she's still alive? What happened to her friends? Did her friends actually die? And then we see, and we know that her dad's still alive, John Saxon, too. But then her mom isn't, I think. I don't know. It just makes weird continuity later, because then you're like, okay, well, so what happened? Like, was that a dream then? And it was just a nightmare of like her nightmare at the end. Like, honestly, you could have had her wake up at the end and then been like, that was like a gotcha. Like, that was just a nightmare again, and she's just thinking like this is what could have happened or something. I don't know. It's just weird that, like, Robert Shea was so bent on, we need to have a more open ending. And, I mean, you could have continued stuff with it, like with the third one, with that happy ending, I feel like. Because, I mean, she says goodbye to her mother and drives to school with her friends. Oh, that the movie was just a nightmare, and that's what the happy ending was. It's kind of, well, okay. I don't know about that. I mean, I think if you kind of went on the compromise of everything happened still, I don't know. I always thought it was such a weird ending to begin with, where like but you know what? I'm gonna save that for my final thoughts. So let's just move on from there. Kill counter. All right, so we've arrived at the kill counter. This is the part of the podcast where we go through the kills and deaths in the film. A Nightmare on Elm Street has a total of 4 deaths. This film is strange with its deaths, since the ending, as we said, kind of undoes everything, or more or less. Wes Craven ends the film like it's a dream, so we see most everyone's back at the end of the film anyway. So, but let's just get into the kills, okay? The first death in the film is Tina Gray. The night she has Nancy and Glenn spend the night, Rod shows up and they sleep together. That night, as she's asleep, Freddy shows up in Tina's nightmare. Tina struggles with Krueger in her sleep and wakes up Rod. And he watches as Krueger, well, he doesn't see Krueger, but he sees Tina get dragged up the walls, up to the roof, and slashing her across the chest with his finger knife gloved, blood splattering everywhere. And then after like an elongated scene of her just yelling and exhausted yelling, drops her onto the bed full of blood and splatters everywhere. And Rod just dips out. And from there, he's arrested for the death of Tina. He's the second death in the film. He awaits in jail, falls asleep. Nancy has a dream of Krueger going into his cell. And that's when, he notices Nancy's there, and he kind of turns his attention away from Rod, but then he causes the bedsheet to snake its way around his neck, and then it makes it look like he hanged himself, which we know that it wasn't suicide, it was Freddy Krueger, and he kills him. And then the third death of the film is Glenn Lance, and that's obviously Johnny Depp's character. And he's in his room, he's watching TV and listening to music, Nancy's trying to get a hold of him, don't fall asleep, don't fall asleep, and like, trying to get a hold of him, and his dad's like, no, you never call this house again. I'm a big fat guy. And he's supposed to stay awake, but he falls asleep, and that's when Krueger pulls him into the bed, and he pulls everything that's on the bed, the TV he's got there, the music he's listening to, everything just pulls into the bed, and then blood shoots up as a geyser onto the ceiling, and it's this awesome effect. And we'll talk about it a little later, but it's just this awesome effect. I'll talk about it again. The last death of the film is Marge Thompson, Nancy's mom. After she gets drunk, Marge heads up to her bed. Oh, wow, Nancy takes her up to the bed and, puts her to sleep. Nancy booby traps the house and pulls Krueger into the real world. Is able to set him on fire. And then, Dawn breaks back in, and the police come in, and they start searching, and the two follow the fire, like he's leaving like fire footprints up the stairs, leads to the room. And that's where they see, when they open the door, that Krueger's on her, like on fire. Dawn throws the blanket over her, causes to put it out, and then when they take it off, it's just her burned skeleton that just descends into an abyss that just appears out of nowhere, and then they go to touch it and it's gone, solid again. And she's just gone, dead. So not a lot of kills, but very memorable, with a lot of gore and blood effects. That's what I will say. Like, this movie does do really well with gore and blood. I mean, especially compared to when you're comparing it to the first of like others, like as we talked about in our other series. We did Halloween. You know, the first Halloween, not very gory. The first Friday the 13th, not very gory. The first Scream, I mean, it's got a lot of blood effects, but it's not very gory. This one, I would say, is really the start of where, like, you start seeing more and more gore and blood. And honestly, I think it works really well. And I think that the Glenn death is the one that stands out the most and gets you like, wow, man. And Tina's death, I think. Because, like, it's something you don't really see that much, too, where he's dragging the body up the wall and floating in the air, and it's because you can't see him because he's in the dream, but he's affecting her in real life. And there's a lot of, like, this movie has a lot of great, like, it doesn't have a lot of kills, but it has a lot of great kills. I mean, for not a lot, but, like, for the kills that it's got, like, there's at least half of them are, like, memorable enough that I'm pretty sure if you were listening, like, the kill, like, best, like, not best kills, but, like, kill scenes in, like, horror films or death scene, you know what I mean, like that, I think these would top people's lists. A Nightmare on Elm Street was made on a budget of $1.8 million and had a limited release in theaters on November 9th, 1984, in 165 theaters, and grossed $1.27 million opening weekend. The film would earn over $25 million domestically and gross worldwide over $57 million. So New Line had a hit and a well-received film, 95% on Rotten Tomatoes. They made back more than just their investment, so they got started on a sequel with or without Craven. Pre-production for A Nightmare on Elm Street 2 began on April 1985, with screenwriter Leslie Bohem pitching to the producers the idea of using pregnancy and possession as a plot device for the second film. To quote Bohem, "My concept was a homage to Rosemary's Baby. I came up with a plot that had a new family move into the house, a teenage boy, his pregnant mother, and a stepfather the boy didn't get along with. It was a real bloody, scary idea, much more physical and realistic, because the dream reality stuff was less central to these movies then. My story was more of a possession scenario, with Freddy getting inside the mother's womb, controlling the fetus, but New Line passed on that because executive Sarah Risher was pregnant at the time, and I understand the idea upset her, so they went with David Chaskin's concept instead. Though both films ended up using the spirit possession concept, the pregnancy idea would eventually be used in the sequel, A Nightmare on Elm Street 5, The Dream Child, which Bohem would write the script for. Robert Shea offered Wes Craven the chance to direct the sequel, but he turned down the offer since he had many problems with the script, such as the possessed parakeet that seemed very ridiculous to him, and a Freddy merging with the main character and manifesting in real life at the pool party to kill scores of teenagers, of which many were bigger than him, which Craven thought would diminish Freddy's scare factor, as Robert Englund was not a very tall man and not in stature. Jack Sholder, who had previously written and directed Alone in the Dark for New Line Cinema, was offered to direct. In 2020 interview, he explained that he had no interest in making horror films and that he was going to turn Robert Shaye down. Shoulder realized that A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2, Freddy's Revenge, could put him on the map as a director, so said yes to Shaye's offer. The intro scene with Jesse's nightmare of Freddy driving the bus was carried over from the previous film. Craven was vehemently against Freddy appearing in person as the driver of the car in the epilogue scene, as he felt that the storyline for Nancy, Tina, Rod, and Glenn should be self-contained in the first film. The compromise between him and Shaye was therefore to use the idea of Freddy driving the vehicle for the sequel, but not for any characters from Craven's film. The character of Lisa Weber was named Lisa Paletti in the script, and on Wes Craven's suggestions, Chaskin put more emphasis on Lisa in the film than he originally intended. He explains that Craven suggests that we shift the focus from Jesse, the male lead. In the script, the focus was on Jesse for 90% of the film, then suddenly it shifted to Lisa, his girlfriend. I pretty much added some focus on Lisa. Now it's like 50-50. So with everything lined up, the production of A Nightmare on Elm Street 2, Freddy's Revenge, went off without a hitch.
Someone is coming back to Elm Street. He is not friendly. He is not patient.
Kill for me.
And he is not a welcome visitor. But he has something terribly special for the new kid on the block.
It started to happen again. Dad! I'm in trouble. You've had some scary dreams, okay? Help!
Daddy can't help you now.
There's something inside him.
Fight him! You are not afraid of him. He doesn't even exist.
Freddy Krueger is back on Elm Street.
Get out of here, Lisa!
Jesse, fight him!
Watch out for him. He'll be in your neighborhood soon. A Nightmare on Elm Street, Part 2.
You are all my children now.
Freddy's Revenge.
Five years after Freddy Krueger's apparent defeat, the Walshes have moved into Nancy Thompson's former home. Their teenage son, Jesse, played by Mark Patton, has a nightmare about being stalked by Krueger, who is driving a school bus. He awakens and attributes the strange dream to the unusual heat in his room. Jesse goes to school with his friend Lisa, played by Kim Myers, whom he has a crush on, but is too shy to flirt with. After getting into a fight with a boy named Grady, who is played by Robert Russler, during gym class, their teacher, Coach Snyder, who's played by Marshall Bell, has him stay after class, and they become friends. Lisa comes to visit Jesse after school, and they discover Nancy Thompson's diary detailing her nightmares, which are strikingly similar to Jesse's. Small fires happen throughout the house, culminating in the spontaneous combustion of their pet bird. Jesse's father, Ken, played by Clu Gulager, accuses Jesse of causing the fires. The following night, Jesse has a nightmare where he encounters Freddy, played once again by Robert Englund, who tells him to kill for him. The dreams grow more intense, and Jesse unsuccessfully attempts different measures to keep himself awake. As he eventually begins to wander the streets at night, he is caught by Schneider ordering a drink at a gay bar and is made to run laps at the school as punishment. After sending Jesse to the showers, Schneider is attacked by an unseen force that drags him into the showers. Jesse vanishes into the steam, and Freddy emerges, killing Schneider by slashing his back. Afterwards, Jesse is horrified to see the glove on his hand. He is escorted home by the police after being found wandering the streets naked, and his parents begin to suspect that Jesse may be on drugs or mentally disturbed. Lisa takes Jesse to an abandoned factory where Freddy Krueger worked, but they find nothing there. The following night, Jesse goes to Lisa's pool party and kisses her in the cabana, but his body begins to change, and he leaves in a panic. He goes to Grady's house confesses to killing Schneider and instructs Grady to watch him as he sleeps and to stop him if he tries to leave. When Grady eventually falls asleep, Freddy emerges from Jesse's body and kills Grady. Freddy then changes back to Jesse, who finds himself looking at Freddy's laughing reflection in Grady's mirror. He flees before Grady's parents enter the room. Returning to Lisa's house, Jesse tells her what is going on. Lisa realizes that Jesse's terror is giving Freddy his strength, but he cannot stop fearing him and transforms again. Freddy locks Lisa's parents in their bedroom and attacks her, but realizes he cannot harm her due to Jesse's influence. Freddy goes outside, where he begins to slaughter the partygoers. Lisa's father emerges with a shotgun, but Lisa stops him from shooting Freddy, who escapes in a ball of flame. Lisa drives to the factory, facing sudden nightmares and having to control her fear before confronting Freddy. She pleads with Jesse to fight Freddy, but Freddy's hold is too strong. When Lisa confesses her love for Jesse and kisses Freddy, Jesse begins to fight back. Freddy combusts and turns to ash, from which Jesse emerges. Later, as Jesse, Lisa, and Lisa's friend Carrie are taking the bus to school, Jesse begins to notice similarities to his original nightmare and panics. After Lisa calms Jesse down, Carrie says that it's all over just before Freddy's clawed arm bursts through her chest. Freddy laughs as the bus drives into the field, just as in Jesse's first nightmare. We move on to some trivia about the film A Nightmare on Elm Street 2, Freddy's Revenge, and learn some things about the behind the scenes, the production, and the actors. New Line Cinema originally didn't ask Robert Englund to return as Freddy Krueger and refused to give him a pay raise. A stuntman was cast as Freddy at the start of production. After 2 weeks of filming, Robert Shea realized this was a terrible lapse in judgment, fired the stuntman, hired Englund, and met his demands. Which is ridiculous when you think about it in retrospect, because Englund became the face of Freddy even until now. Like, we literally had the Goldbergs, which was on for a while too long, and they even had an episode with Freddy Krueger, and they brought back Robert Englund to play him, and this was years after he'd stopped playing Freddy, and he even played him in New Nightmare, and the only time he didn't play Freddy Krueger was in the remake, and that's the only time it's ever been. And it's just so weird that at this time, like, you're just like, oh, let's just get somebody else to do it. So strange, so weird. It's like if you were like to just change the mask on Michael, or a Ghostface, or something. Like, it's just so weird. Like, why would you switch it up? It's like they could have almost had like a Halloween 3 on their hands, where like you change it too much without explaining enough that it just kind of fails. Makeup effects artist Kevin Yeager replaced David B. Miller, who designed the Freddy makeup for the original. Yeager only had a few pictures in the original film as reference, so he redesigned Freddy's look. Studying pictures of burn victims, he made changes to Freddy's look, namely by bringing out the facial bones. He said it was intent to make Freddy look like a male witch, and give Freddy red and amber eyes to make him more demonic looking. And I think in this one he has a distinct style and a distinct look that, like you said, like he changed it up a little bit, and it works for this iteration of Freddy Krueger. Maybe they should have stuck with maybe a couple of things here and there. I think maybe the eyes. I think the eyes work in. I think they kind of brought that back for the look for a New Nightmare. But I think generally speaking, he kind of looks the same from the third to the sixth film. Those runs of movies, I think they kind of standardized the way he looks. Didn't really do anything too different outside of like if he changes in the dream or not. But other than that, I think pretty much Freddy has the same kind of look. So Wes Craven refused to work on the film because he never intended or wanted for Nightmare on Elm Street to have a sequel, and even wanted the first film to have a happy ending, which we talked about. He also didn't like the idea of Freddy manipulating the protagonist into committing the murders. He did return to the franchise as the writer of Nightmare on Elm Street 3, Dream Warriors, that's the next one up, and as the director of A New Nightmare. And I think it was just a product of the time of, we got to keep pumping out sequels. Once we get a hit on our hands for horror, that's what they did with Halloween. That's what they did with Friday the 13th. That's what they did with Texas Chainsaw. That's what they did with Child's Play. They just kept, we got to get more sequels out. We got to get more sequels out. And so same thing happened with Freddy. And, when there's a person like Wes Craven who knew what he wanted to do with that first film, and then you're coming in and kind of changing things up, making it so that, we want there to be another one. We want to continue the series, and he's just like, no, I don't intend for this to go on. And then you go on without him, and then, he, at some point, he's probably going to come back and be like, I want to make sure things get, course corrected here and there. And I'm so glad he at least came back he comes back for the next one, and he'll come back again later, and we'll see inklings of some other franchise with that one, but we can wait till then. As Jesse transforms into Freddy, we see a quick shot of Freddy's eye staring out of Jesse's open mouth. To accomplish the shot, effects artists made a dummy of Mark Patton's head with a hole for Freddy's eye to look through. Then they affixed the prop to a flat surface and had someone put their head into the opening. The only person whose head would fit was the girlfriend of special effects designer Kevin Yeager. It is the only time in the series that Freddy is portrayed by a woman, not counting the times he pretended to be other people in the dream world, obviously. And it's just crazy because it's that same kind of thing, like with the stretched fabric on the wall effect, where it's like this more practical effect to get like these things. Like that's what I like about the earlier ones, and what kind of ruins when we get to it. The remake is that the use of CGI for like the dream world, like all this kind of dream logic stuff, I think it works better with the practical effects, like so much more. So when it comes to subtext in film, many films have been examined to understand what some filmmakers are trying to instill in particular characters and scenes and the overall stories. They're trying to hide subjects, especially back when we had the Hays Code and when the MPAA first started, and we were very much more trying to keep certain things out of the public eye, be it like in politics or like with gay or trans, anything like that. And they always try and do something as far as like the filmmakers to bring that out in a story. A Nightmare on Elm Street 2, Freddy's Revenge, has a lot of innuendos, tropes, and outright blatant homoerotic subtext. Mark Patton, the actor who played Jesse, who himself would come out years later, has claimed that the subtext was written in more and more by the screenwriter, David Chaskin, and was increasingly emphasized during rewrites. Welcome to Our Nightmares, behind the scenes with today's horror actors. A novel written about the behind the film elaborates on the film's homoerotic subtext. stating that the film suggested an undertone of homosexuality, starting with the protagonist's gender-neutral name. Jesse's rarely fully clothed. He and a tormentor have a sweaty wrestling match. His coach, clad in leather, basically hits on him in a gay bar, then gets killed by Freddy, including a bare-ass spanking. Freddy emerges from Jesse's chest in the same forced birth technique that made the Alien films legendary. Patton blames Chaskin, who he says claimed that the subtext arose from how Patton played the part. I love when he uses the word subtext. He complained he did actually go to a freshman English course in high school. This is not subtext. That's what Patton said about Chaskin. In 2016, he said Chaskin sabotaged him. Nobody ever affected my confidence. The boys that threw rocks at me, nobody. But this man did. Chaskin denied for years that there was a gay subtext in his screenplay. Instead, at one point, he told a reporter that Patton had simply played the part too gay. The emotional stress of the film led to Patton leaving acting shortly afterwards for a career in interior decorating. And while Chaskin has tried to reach out and apologize to Patton over the years, to limited success, he maintains that Patton's interpretations of Jesse were choices that he made. I have to believe that he got it, and that was how he decided to play it. In 2010, Chaskin finally admitted it was a deliberate choice on his part. Homophobia was skyrocketing, and I began to think about our core audience, adolescent boys, and how all of this stuff might be trickling down into their psyches. He explained, "My thought was that tapping into that angst would give an extra edge to the horror." Which side do you take on the film? Personally, I take Patton's side. Clearly, as evidence of just watching the film, someone made the conscious choice of adding in scenes, tones, themes, and leaning heavily towards this homoeroticism, with including an outright scene where he goes to a gay leather bar where the person, the coach, the master, brings him back to do laps around like the gym, and then they go into the shower together. It's not very like subtext. That's why I bring up Patton talking about how does Chaskin even understand what the word means? Because this is not subtext. This is overt homoeroticism. And even if you are to be like, oh, well, it's to play into at the time when, this was made, and oh, God, guys, you're just getting it wrong. It's because, see, they're just all jocular, it's, locker room talk. It's you make fun of it with your buddies, and, it gives that extra edge of horror because, oh, what if you were gay? It just screams to me so much homophobia, too, especially from the time, of when this was made in the late 80s, especially then during the AIDS pandemic. Sorry, I don't know why I stuttered with that. But that whole era and, not understanding and, hatred and, it's just ridiculous. And, this can plainly be seen from higher-ups pushing a closeted actor towards interactions with the life that he was trying desperately to disassociate from. And in retrospect, it's a great snapshot of dealing with feelings of struggling with being gay or even bi, of just watching the film. But, sometimes the cost is not worth the product. And unfortunately, a lot of people do cite this as wow, this is when I knew I was gay, or I knew I was bi, or I had these feelings too, and I just didn't know what to do with them. And they could clearly see themselves in this character, and that's great for them. Great for them to interpret this and have a hero that they can look toward, or more so an anti-hero, because he does kill people, like Jesse. Somebody that they can see themselves in. But then again, it's what happens to most young people who are struggling, teenagers, young adults who are struggling with this kind of identity and like if they're wrong, if the society's wrong, if people were pushing them to, stay in the closet, to change the way that they are, to stop doing this, stop doing that, stop acting like this, stop acting like that. It's I'm just so glad that, like, at least for the most part, we've moved past that. There's still obviously a lot that we need to address nowadays still, and it's not all sunshines and rainbow, but at least it's better than it was back then. And at least, you can at least, for the most part, talk to someone. And if you're out there and you're listening to this and you're struggling with it, I always talk about mental health and how that's your number one thing. That's just one thing that I say you should look out for. It's your mental health. And, if you're ever struggling with it and you feel like this and you're like, I feel like something different, you can always talk to somebody about it or try and find someone to talk to, People are out there. People want to listen. People want to help. Even when they really seem like they don't want to. But they'll listen. But yes, I could count this as a truly gay-leaning, bi-leaning film and piece of cinema, and I think it deserves to be rewatched and for people to know about it more and for people to go out and view it. We have arrived at the kill counter once again. This is the part of the podcast where we go through the kills and deaths in the film. A Nightmare on Elm Street 2, Freddy's Revenge, has 10 total kills, 6 more than the first film. Are they just as memorable as the first film, or are they a step down? Let's go over the kills. The first death in the film comes after Jesse awakens from his dream and wanders down to a BDSM bar. Here he runs into Coach Snyder, who brings Jesse back to the school and makes him run around the gym. Eventually, they head back to the showers, where Snyder's tied up, stripped naked. Krueger emerges from the steam and slashes across his back with his blades, killing Coach Snyder. Ron Grady is the next to be killed. After leaving Lisa in a panic, Jesse sneaks into Grady's room. Jesse confesses to killing Coach Snyder and tells Grady to watch him as he sleeps, to keep him from leaving. Grady accidentally falls asleep as Freddy emerges from Jesse and stabs Grady through his torso with his knife-gloved hand. Jesse goes to Lisa after killing Grady. As they become intimate, Jesse transforms into Freddy. He tries to kill Lisa, but due to Jesse's feelings, Freddy cannot harm Lisa. Freddy leaves and attacks 7 people at the pool party. 1 by slashing, 2 being boiled in the pool, 1 burned by the fire, another trampled, 1 stabbed, and the last one slashed and thrown into the grill. The last death occurs on the bus at the end of the film. Jesse, Lisa, and Lisa's friend Carrie ride the bus as Jesse begins to think this is another nightmare. Carrie says all of that stuff is over, and suddenly Carrie is stabbed through the back with Freddy's finger knives. I think I'd say that probably the first death is probably the most memorable kill out of all of them, with Coach Snyder, having Jesse meet him at the, gay bar, having them go back to the school, running the laps, getting into the shower, and then, like the steam comes out, and, like he gets stripped naked, and Freddy emerges and kills him. But other than that, I forgot like a lot of these kills. Honestly, I think that was the one that stood out the most to me. A Nightmare on Elm Street 2, Freddy's Revenge, was released in 522 theaters in New York, Washington, D.C., Detroit, and Texas. The film grossed 3.3 million in its first 3 days of release and over 30 million at the U.S. box office. The critical response was mixed, with mostly negative reviews. Most of the criticism comparing the film to the first one. The film garnered some praise for the special effects and the performance of Englund, who had come to embody the role of Freddy Krueger. Most of the criticism came from the lack of convincing performances outside of Englund or memorable scenes. Following the critical failure of A Nightmare on Elm Street 2, Freddy's Revenge, New Line Cinema and Robert Shaye were unsure if it was worth continuing with the series. Wes Craven, who opted out of the second film, citing that he did not want the original to evolve into a franchise, came back to the series due to dissatisfaction with Freddy's Revenge. Craven signed on to co-write the screenplay for the third installment with the intention that it would end the series. So we will see if the third installment to the Nightmare on Elm Street series truly ended everything. Spoiler, it didn't. Now we come to the part of the podcast where I give my final thoughts. I remember being a little kid and I was watching this film, or at least the first film, A Nightmare on Elm Street, with my mom and, you know, probably my siblings, my dad, I'm not sure, but obviously my mom, because she's the one who always put on a lot of these older films for us. And I remember there's a scene where, you know, it opens with the nightmare, and then, you know, we learn a little bit about, like, the group of friends, and then we get to the sleepover, and the part that always actually really did scare me was, and that's just mainly because, you know, like, if you ever listen to, if you follow on the TikTok, or you listen to this more often, you'll know that, you know, my family's really haunted with, like, a lot of things that we've had to deal with in the past. We've seen and heard and experienced a lot of strange and unexplained scary things. And so there's the part where, like, they hear the, like, outside, and it freaks them all out, and they're like, what's going on? What's out there? And right then and there, like me now examining the scene, it's like they're all scared because they've all had dreams of this man who just appears with these gloved, knifed, fingered hand that appears in their dreams and is trying to get them. And to them, hearing that just reminds them of the dream. And to me, it always kind of scared me, because it was like, what's out there? And, you know, they go out to investigate the strange noise, and then it just turns out it's, like, Rod, the boyfriend. And then it gets into, like, an even, like, crazier scene that, like, is like, whoa, that's pretty extreme for a movie where, you know, and it's one way to, like, really get, like, people to start engaging in your film, really hit them off and get them, like, to be like, whoa, okay, all right, you got me hooked, was when seeing her, Tina, you know, she's in her dream, but then in the real world, we see how they're interacting, and she's just floating in the air. She's dragged across the wall up to the ceiling, and, you know, slicing her open, blood splattering everywhere, and then she just drops to the bed, and the blood splatters, and dang, you know, it's like, whoa. Now that was a wild ride, you know, like, and for me, like, it's always stood a pretty good test of time. It's already going to be, 40 years since this film came out, and it's still, you know, I mean, it's regarded as a classic. I think as soon as it came out, it was like a Halloween or a Friday the 13th. It really stood up against all the others, and, you know, made Freddy out to be one of the, you know, like, if you were to have, like, a Mount Rushmore of, like, the old, you know, monsters, it would be like Frankenstein's monster and Dracula, and maybe like the Creature from the Black Lagoon, the Mummy, you know, things like that. And then over here, you have another one where it's like the slashers that built that slasher, bedrock. And it would probably be Michael, Leatherface, Jason, and like Freddy, and maybe Chucky up there. And then you'd probably add someone newer, maybe like a Ghostface, who helped to revive it. And honestly, well deserved. Robert Englund brings it. Honestly, to imagine Freddy Krueger as portrayed by someone else it's always going to be that difficult thing of trying to separate the character from the actor, right? So someone who's played this character for so long. And when they did it with Jackie Earle Haley, honestly, I think he did a pretty good job. We'll get to that then. But I think Robert Englund really gives this kind of performance, and once he understood the character and how he was going to portray him, he just played him that way every time. He knew how to do it. He knew how to come onto the stage and be Freddy Krueger. And one thing that I think this franchise kind of needed was a kind of a final girl that could stick with the series. We kind of got that with Nancy because she's mentioned in the sequel, and she'll be in here again. We'll see her again. Don't worry. But like how Jamie Lee Curtis is Laurie Strode, or Scream's Sidney Prescott, But then again, you look at like Friday the 13th, and they got pretty good without having a main through of a final girl or a final guy. I mean, we did have people the girl from the first one come to the second one, but that was about it. And then Tommy Jarvis kind of showed up for 3 of them, and that, I think, honestly, I wish they would just bring him back. If he would come back for Final Night or Freddy or Jason Goes to Hell, I think it would have been pretty good. But anyways, getting back to A Nightmare on Elm Street, Wes Craven, I did not know a lot about when I was looking this up. I did not know he was a philosophy major, and now it makes more sense, especially once he gets into the meta-ness of everything and why he would only want one film of this. You can clearly see, let's get into the ending of the original Nightmare on Elm Street, because he obviously had a plan for the film to go a certain way, because yes, there are certain things that you're like, and it leads towards this: what is real, what is the dream, right? What is going on here that's causing this? And then when it starts to fade into each other and phase into each other, and the dreams and the real worlds are meshing more and more towards the end, I think that's when you're supposed to understand, oh, okay, this has all been a dream, and that's why we would have got that happy ending where it's her, Nancy, at the end with her friends, happily going back to school, and that's the end of it. The monster that was Freddy was just a nightmare. But then you get people like the producers who come in, like Robert Shea, who wants to be able to make a series because he can see oh, okay, this is going to go somewhere. I have a feeling. And so when they come in, they're like, we want you to do this, we want you to do this kind of ending, we want you to do that kind of ending. And then they end up making 4 different endings. They kind of mesh some endings together, and then we're ended with it makes for a memorable ending, one that kind of doesn't make any sense later. We'll get to it in the next episode. But then it also is so wait, was that a dream? Was that all real? Was the ending a dream? Was that not real? And I think that's how you're supposed to interpret the ending, is the ending is not the real part. That is more of a dream. Because it ends with her and her friends getting in the car, and they're trapped in the car, drives off, and the mom gets pulled back into the house, and that's it. That's how it ends. And it's a pretty memorable ending. Honestly, that's why I honestly give it 5 stars. I love Nightmare on Elm Street. It's so memorable for the gore and effects, to Freddy Krueger, to his glove hand, to the characters. I mean, Heather Langenkamp plays it really good. John Saxon's amazing in the little role that he has as her dad. Johnny Depp is pretty good in his first role, and I think Wes Craven really hit it out of the park, and kind of solidified with this, like, a master of horror. But getting into Nightmare on Elm Street 2, Freddy's Revenge, I remember not really seeing this one that much. I think I've watched it only a couple of times. And, it never really hooked me as much as the first one. I just remember, some guy, and then, like, just kind of felt kind of bored with it. But then I remember watching more and more reviews of it, and I'm coming back to it more and more, and I'm like, you know what? This isn't a bad movie. It sucks that it's a sequel to such a great film. Like, it is a good movie, and Freddy, and like I said, Robert Englund, he plays that part so well, and, when he brings it, right? And there's this part where, with the practical effects, that's one thing, too, I will say, give credit to both these films. Obviously, they came out in the 80s, so they have to use more practical effects. But they use this effect where he pulls the skin off of his scalp, Freddy does, to show Jesse, because he's like, you're the, you got the bod, I got the brains. And he's like pulling his scalp back, and you see the brains underneath it, and it's just this great effect. And there's just, like, see things like that, I wish they would do in movies more and more. And, like, I love the idea of, like, in the first one with his arms all stretched out and long, scraping along. And then, just, there's other things in the second one, too. Just, I love the idea of, like, being in the dream and, like, Freddy's driving the bus. I always like that. That's pretty cool. And this idea of, like, you turning into the monster, honestly, is a pretty good idea. I don't understand why Wes really didn't like that idea. I guess I could see it from being like, no, I created him to be this, not for that to happen. But I think it would work, and it could work if it was done again. I think it could really work in, like, a newer film, like if you did like another Nightmare on Elm Street, Freddy Returns, and like I feel like that's one way you could bring him back, and you could have a new actor step into that role or something. But, I mean, obviously it's just not as good as the first one. And, I mean, it's still a good film. I'm not going to say that. I think I'd give it 3 stars. Because it is, like I said, it is pretty good for being, like, this, like, film that is people dealing with this side of them, this, let's code for, queerness. But other than that, other than when you strip kind of that away, it's just it kind of feels like they took some of the elements from the first one, and they were like, how do we do this again? But kind of one up it. Oh, he's kind of he needs someone to watch him while he's sleeping. Oh, okay, and then they get killed, and then it's their loved one. Oh, they can't hurt their loved one. I don't know, things like that. But overall, these are 2 pretty good films. I mean, obviously, Nightmare on Elm Street's probably one of the best ones, and I can't wait till we get to our rankings of them. That'll be in the last episode. But there's going to be one that's coming up, guys. It's like, wow. Yeah, this is pretty good. And then there's another one that's like, oh my God. It is pretty good. This is probably one of the best ones. But for now, we got a pretty a solid 5 and a solid 3. So those are the end of my thoughts on things. I mean, other than like it's just they're just such. The first film is just by itself. It's like comparing it to Halloween, or you're comparing it to the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, or Friday the 13th. It's just become so iconic onto itself that it's like surpassed like it's moved above just like ABC rankings to the S tier, where you can't really, the faults you're going to give it are just because it came out in the 80s, they couldn't really do this, they couldn't do that, this kind of looks a little dated, but other than that, it still holds up. like Halloween. It still holds up to this day. I would say, I remember we were watching it with my nephew, and the opening is just enough for like that to scare him. Such a good film. So glad we got these two down. We'll get to the next 3, and then we'll end it off with the last 3, and then we're gonna talk about one that's kind of a crossover. But until then, guys, what was your worst nightmare? What's your opinion of the first 2 films? Are you now a little gay from watching Freddy's Revenge? Because that BDSM club definitely didn't turn me on. We want to thank you all for listening, and if you like what you heard, please subscribe to get every new episode downloaded. Do you have any personal or fictional, paranormal, supernatural, or unexplained stories? We'd love to read them on the podcast. Please send your stories, recommendations, or anything else to horrorboxpodcast@gmail.com. If you want to show more support, you can follow our socials on Instagram, Threads, or TikTok @HorrorboxPodcast. Also, you can buy me a coffee at coffee.com/HorrorboxPodcast. It really helps out. We'll see you next time and hear what comes out from the Horror Box.